I'm Keziah Vance, 32, and I've just been appointed as the head of strategic acquisitions for the largest luxury conglomerate in the tri-state area. I sat in the high back leather chair and spun it slowly toward the floor to ceiling windows. The city lights glittered below me like scattered diamonds on black velvet. My reflection stared back from the glass, sharp and polished in a tailored blazer that cost more than my rent used to be for an entire year. I took a sip of sparkling water and let the carbonation bite my tongue. It felt like victory, but my mind wasn't on the seven-figure salary or the corner office with the panoramic view. My mind was drifting back to a darker, smaller place. My journey started in a cramped studio apartment that smelled perpetually of turpentine and instant ramen. It was a shoebox of a room where the radiator rattled like a dying engine and the windows stuck shut in the summer. That apartment was where Tiffany Thorne used to visit me. She didn't come because we were best friends, even though she claimed we were. She came to witness the spectacle of my struggle. I can still see her standing in the doorway of my tiny kitchenette. She always looked out of place, like a peacock in a pigeon coop. She would clutch her quilted designer bag tight against her side, as if she were afraid my poverty might be contagious. I was usually covered in charcoal dust or acrylic paint, my hair tied back in a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it. Tiffany would lean against the peeling doorframe and sigh. "Oh, Keziah," she would say, her voice dripping with that faux sympathy that cuts deeper than an insult. "Still drawing? Daddy says the market is absolutely exploding right now, and here you are, sketching fruit." She would laugh then. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a soft, breathy chuckle that made my skin crawl. She told me I was wasting my life. She told me art was a hobby for rich wives, not a career for someone with student loans. She bragged about her position at her father's firm, a job created specifically for her, with a title she couldn't even spell and a salary she didn't earn. I would just nod, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday in November. It was raining, and my roof was leaking into a bucket near my bed. Tiffany had stopped by to show off her new engagement ring. She looked at the meager contents of my counter, a half-empty jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread, her nose wrinkled. "You can't live like this," she said, shaking her head. "It's pathetic, honestly." Then she did the one thing I have never forgiven. She reached into her purse. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers pull out a crisp $20 bill. She didn't hand it to me. She didn't place it on the table. She threw it at my feet. "Buy a real meal, sweetie," she said, stepping over the money as she turned to leave. "You look anemic." I stood there frozen. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the sound of the rain and the bill resting on the dirty linoleum near my paint-stained socks. I remember the cold sweat on my palms. I remember the heat rising up my neck, burning my ears. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to scream. I wanted to chase her down the hall and shove the money back into her expensive bag. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up that $20 bill. I didn't spend it. I taped it to the wall above my desk. I stared at it every single day. That humiliation became the fuel for every late-night study session I endured over the next decade. It was the reason I put down the paintbrush and picked up the textbooks. It was the reason I worked 2 jobs while getting my MBA. Every time I wanted to quit, every time my eyes blurred from staring at spreadsheets at 3:00 a.m., I looked at that bill. I remembered the pity in her eyes. I remembered the feeling of being small. And I swore to myself that one day the dynamic would shift. I just never guessed how satisfying that shift would be until the acquisition papers landed on my desk this morning. 3 years had passed since the incident with the $20 bill, and I was foolish enough to think time had leveled the playing field. I stood outside the double oak doors of the Grand Hotel ballroom, smoothing the fabric of a dress I had found at a consignment shop. It was a deep emerald silk, vintage, slightly frayed at the hem if you looked too closely, but I had convinced myself it looked bohemian chic. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of industrial carpet cleaner and expensive perfume that drifted from inside. I wanted to prove that I was fine. I wanted to show them that Keziah Vance, the art kid, was still standing. I pushed the doors open. The blast of noise hit me instantly. A wall of clinking glass, high-pitched squeals of recognition, and the thumping bass of music we had all listened to when we were 17. I navigated the room, clutching a plastic cup of lukewarm white wine like a shield. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. I nodded at people whose names I had forgot. I was doing okay. I was blending in. Then I saw the circle. It was near the open bar naturally. A tight formation of men in crisp navy suits and women in dresses that sparkled under the chandelier light. In the center of it all was Tiffany. She looked radiant, I had to give her that. She was wearing a red dress that looked like it had been poured onto her body, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She was holding court, gesturing with a champagne flute while the group leaned in, hanging on her every word. I tried to pivot. I tried to turn my heel and head toward the buffet table on the other side of the room. I just wanted to grab a slider and leave, but her eyes were predatory. She spotted me through a gap in the crowd, and her smile sharpened into something razor thin. "Keziah!" she shrieked. It wasn't a greeting, it was a summons. The music seemed to dip in volume. The circle of successful alumni opened up, creating a path directly to her. I felt the collective gaze of the group land on me. There was Jason, the investment banker, Sarah, the corporate lawyer, and Tiffany, the heiress. I forced my legs to move. I walked toward them, feeling the floor absorb the click of my thrift store heels. "Hi, Tiffany," I said. My voice sounded thin, reedy against the backdrop of their confident laughter. She didn't hug me. She stepped back, tilting her head as she scanned me from head to toe. Her eyes lingered on the fraying hem of my dress for a fraction of a second too long. "Look at you," she cooed, loud enough for the table behind us to hear. "So artistic, as always." The group chuckled. It was a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in my chest. "I actually love that you just don't care about trends," she continued, taking a sip of her champagne. "It's so brave. So tell us, Keziah, what are you up to these days? Are you still—" She paused for dramatic effect, swirling the golden liquid in her glass. "Coloring for a living." The heat started at the base of my throat. It crawled up my neck, a violent, prickly flush that I knew was turning my skin a blotchy red. I tightened my grip on my plastic cup until the plastic crinkled. "I'm a freelance illustrator, Tiffany," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I do commission work." She laughed. It was that same breathy, condescending laugh from my apartment, but amplified by an audience. "Commission work," she repeated, turning to Jason. "That means she draws people's pets on Etsy, right?" Jason smirked. "Hey, it's a living, I guess." "Is it, though?" Tiffany asked, her eyes locking onto mine. The smile dropped from her face, replaced by a mask of mock concern. "Because I heard you were struggling, sweetie. I mean really struggling. Have you finally found a man to pay your rent, or are you still trying to convince the world that doodling is a career?" The room went silent for me. The music faded into a dull buzz. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, frantic and bruising. I looked around the circle. No one defended me. No one looked away. They were all grinning, entertained by the dissection of my dignity. I was the court jester brought in for their amusement. I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to tell her about the passion I put into my work. I wanted to tell her about the nights I spent perfecting a single brushstroke. But the words died in my throat. I saw the glint of diamonds on her wrist. I saw the smug assurance of someone who had never skipped a meal, never worried about an electric bill, never felt the crushing weight of financial fear. I realized then that words meant nothing to people like Tiffany. Money was their language, power was their dialect, and I was illiterate. I looked her dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I let the humiliation sear itself into my bones. I wanted to remember exactly how this felt. I wanted to bottle this agonizing shame so I could drink it later. Without saying a word, I turned around. "Oh, don't run away," Tiffany called out after me. Laughter followed me all the way to the exit signs. "I have a 20 in my purse if you need cab fare." I walked out into the cool night air, my hands shaking so hard I dropped my plastic cup on the sidewalk. I didn't go home to sleep. I went back to my studio apartment. I turned on the harsh overhead light and looked at the easel in the corner. It was my masterpiece. The Silent City. I had spent 6 months on it. It was a sprawling, melancholic landscape of the city skyline in the rain. It was the best thing I had ever created. It was a piece of my soul on canvas. I sat down at my computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I navigated to the website of a private collector who had emailed me months ago, offering a sum that would cover my rent for 6 months. A sum I had refused because I loved the painting too much to let it go. I typed the reply. "It's yours. Send the wire transfer." I hit send. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and salty, but I wiped it away aggressively. I wasn't an artist anymore. Art was for people who could afford to be vulnerable. I walked over to the painting and took it off the easel. I packed it in bubble wrap, sealing it away like a corpse. Then I opened a new tab. I searched for the top executive MBA programs in the country. I didn't look at the tuition costs. I didn't look at the course load. I looked at the average starting salaries for graduates. I looked at the placement rates for Fortune 500 companies. I started filling out the application at 2:00 a.m. Every keystroke was a strike against the person I used to be. I was done coloring. I was done struggling. I was going to learn their language and I was going to speak it better than they did. The rage in my chest wasn't a wildfire anymore, it was a forge. And I was just beginning to sharpen the blade. The acceptance letter came 3 weeks later, but the real acceptance happened in front of a mirror in a public bathroom at the university library. I cut my hair. I didn't go to a salon. I used a pair of fabric scissors I had once used to trim canvas. I watched long, messy strands of artistic hair fall into the sink, clogging the drain with the person I used to be. When I looked up, the woman staring back at me looked severe. She looked hungry. She looked like she had nothing left to lose, which made her the most dangerous person in the room. My first semester was a baptism by fire. I walked into lecture halls filled with men in polos and loafers who had been discussing stock portfolios with their fathers since they were 6. I sat in the back, wearing a blazer I'd found at Goodwill that I had tailored myself until it fit like armor. When the professor spoke about derivatives and amortization, it sounded like static. I recorded every lecture. I went home to my shoebox apartment, played the recordings at half speed, and transcribed them until my fingers cramped. I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night for the first 6 months. I replaced food with cheap instant coffee that tasted like battery acid and burnt dirt. I remember a Tuesday in November of that first year. It was raining, a cold, miserable sleet that soaked through my thin boots. I was sitting in the 24-hour study lab, surrounded by empty vending machine wrappers. My eyes were burning so badly, I had to press the heels of my hands into them just to trigger some moisture. I had an advanced macroeconomics exam in 3 hours, and the numbers on the screen were starting to swim. I felt the familiar pull of despair, that soft, seductive voice telling me to go home, pick up a charcoal stick, and draw something beautiful. Instead, I opened my phone. I didn't call my mom. I didn't call a friend. I opened Instagram. There she was, Tiffany. She was in Gashtot. The photo was high resolution, perfectly lit. She was wearing a white fur coat, holding a mug of hot chocolate with a mountain range reflected in her oversized sunglasses. The caption read, "Winter Wonderland with the Besties, bless Snow Bunny." I zoomed in on her smile. It was effortless. It was the smile of someone who had never pulled an all-nighter out of desperation. I stared at the pixels until the rage boiled in my gut, hot and stabilizing. The exhaustion didn't leave, but the weakness did. I closed the app, slammed my phone face down on the desk, and turned back to the spreadsheet. I didn't just pass that exam, I set the curve. By the second year, the transformation was physical. My skin grew paler from living under fluorescent lights. My hands, once permanently stained with phthalo blue and burnt sienna, were now manicured and clean, constantly tapping against plastic keys. I stopped seeing the world in colors and shapes. I started seeing it in profit margins and liabilities. I walked past a bakery and didn't smell the bread. I calculated their overhead based on the foot traffic. I looked at a billboard and analyzed the ad spend versus the probable conversion rate. I was rewiring my brain, stripping out the poetry and installing a processor. I landed an internship at a boutique firm known for being a meat grinder. They hired 20 of us, fully expecting to fire 15 by the end of the summer. I was the oldest intern. I was the only one who didn't come from an Ivy League background. They called me the painter behind my back. I heard them snicker near the water cooler, making jokes about whether I was going to finger paint the quarterly report. I let them laugh. I let them underestimate me. While they went out for happy hour drinks to schmooze with the VPs, I stayed at my desk. I pulled the historical data of the companies we were auditing. I found discrepancies in the ledgers that the senior analysts had missed because they were too busy looking at the big picture. I realized that painting had given me a gift they didn't understand, an obsessive attention to detail. I noticed the negative space. I saw what wasn't there. 3 years in, I was a ghost. I had no social life. I had no hobbies. My apartment was bare, devoid of art, functional and sterile. I lived on caffeine and pure ambition. I was a machine designed for one purpose. Every paycheck I earned went into high-yield savings or aggressive investment portfolios I managed myself. I wasn't buying clothes. I wasn't buying furniture. I was buying freedom. I kept tabs on Tiffany like she was a volatile stock. I watched her get engaged to a man with a jawline like a superhero and a trust fund to match. I watched the wedding photos flood my feed, a lavish affair in Tuscany that probably cost more than I would earn in a decade. I saw the honeymoon in the Maldives. I saw the purchase of their starter mansion. She was living the fairy tale. I was living in the trenches. But I noticed things in the background of her photos that others missed. I saw the way her husband's smile didn't quite reach his eyes in the later posts. I noticed the frequency of the girl's trips increasing, taking her away from home for weeks at a time. I saw the subtle shift in her brands, less Chanel, more up and coming designers that were actually just cheaper. I was reading the market of her life, and I sensed a correction coming. The turning point came when I was hired as a junior associate at Blackwood and Sorensen, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. It was the big leagues. The salary was astronomical compared to my freelance days, but I didn't change my lifestyle. I kept the small apartment. I kept the cheap car. I remember the day I got my first substantial bonus. It was a check for $50,000. I held it in my hands, sitting in my car in the parking garage. The old Keziah would have booked a trip to Italy to see the Masters. The old Keziah would have bought a loft with north-facing windows. I took the check to the bank and deposited every cent into a separate account I had named the fund. I drove home in silence. I didn't listen to music anymore. I listened to financial news podcasts. I needed to know the pulse of the market. I needed to know who was bleeding and who was feeding. 5 years. That's how long it took to scrub the artist out of my soul and replace her with a shark. I looked in the mirror on the morning of my 30th birthday. The woman looking back was sleek, sharp, and cold. My eyes were clear, devoid of the dreamy haze they used to hold. I wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my parents' car. I sat down at my glass desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the internal memos for potential acquisitions Blackwood and Sorensen was targeting for the next quarter. My finger hovered over the trackpad as I scrolled through the list of struggling companies. And then I saw it. It was buried near the bottom of the list, a mid-sized lifestyle brand that was hemorrhaging cash due to poor management and a failed expansion into the Asian market. Lumina Aesthetics. My heart skipped a beat, a rare physiological reaction I thought I had trained out of my system. I knew that company. I knew it because Tiffany's husband had been appointed CEO 2 years ago. I knew it because Tiffany had been listed as the creative director on their website, a nepotism title if I ever saw one. I clicked on the file. I read the financials. They were a disaster. They were drowning in debt, over-leveraged, and ripe for a hostile takeover. They needed a savior or they needed an executioner. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across my face. It was the first time I had genuinely smiled in 5 years. I reached for my phone, but this time I didn't open Instagram. I dialed the extension for the senior partner. "This is Vance," I said, my voice steady and low. "I've found our next target, and I want to lead the acquisition personally. I'm Keziah Vance, 30 years old, and I am the executioner who decides which multi-million-dollar companies survive the quarter and which ones get stripped for parts." The senior partner didn't just give me permission to pursue Lumina Aesthetics, he gave me the kill order. I remember the exact vibration of his voice through the receiver, gravelly and bored. "If the numbers are as bad as you say, Vance, don't just acquire them. Eviscerate them. I want the assets, not the baggage." I hung up the phone and felt my pulse drop. That's what happens to me now. When the stakes get high, when the violence of the market is about to spill over, I don't panic. I go cold. I go quiet. It's a physiological response I've cultivated over 5 years of sleep deprivation and caffeine abuse. My body knows it's time to hunt. I called an emergency meeting with my team of junior analysts. They filed into the glass-walled conference room looking terrified. I knew that look. I used to wear it. They were 22, 23, wearing suits that didn't quite fit, clutching their laptops like shields. They looked at me and saw a monster. They were right. "Lumina Aesthetics," I said, projecting the financials onto the smart board. The light cast a blue pallor over my hands. We are initiating a hostile takeover. I want a forensic audit of every dime spent in the last 24 months. I don't just want the balance sheets. I want the expense reports. I want the travel logs. I want to know who approved every single latte. I watched them scramble, typing furiously. I stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, feeling the fabric of my suit jacket tighten across my shoulders. It wasn't the Goodwill blazer I used to stitch together with safety pins. This was bespoke charcoal wool, milled in Italy and tailored to within a millimeter of my ribs. It cost $4,000. It felt like steel plating. I walked to the window and looked out at the Manhattan skyline. It was gray and raining, just like that Tuesday in the library years ago when I cried over a macroeconomics textbook. But the rain didn't touch me up here. I was on the 42nd floor, sealed behind impact-resistant glass, breathing filtered air that smelled faintly of ozone and expensive lemon polish. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in the war room. I watched my bank account swell with the quarterly bonus for my last kill, a mid-sized logistics firm I had dismantled in January. The number on the screen was absurd. It was enough to buy the house I grew up in twice, but I didn't feel joy. I felt weight. I felt the heavy, dense gravity of absolute power. I wasn't the girl who accepted charity anymore. I wasn't the artist who people pitied because her shoes were scuffed. I was the woman who dictated terms. I was the woman who signed the checks. And then the data started coming in. One of the analysts, a nervous kid named David, flagged a series of transactions. "Ms. Vance, you need to see this. The creative director budget is unusual." I walked over to his station. I leaned in, smelling his fear. It smelled like dry shampoo and stress sweat. I looked at the screen. There she was, not a photo this time, but a paper trail. Tiffany Blair Holloway, creative director. The expenses were grotesque. A trend forecasting trip to Milan that cost $40,000. A team-building retreat in Aspen that included spa treatments totaling 6 figures. Research materials that were clearly just designer handbags billed to the company card. She wasn't just incompetent, she was looting the ship while it sank. She was treating a failing company like her personal ATM, convinced that her husband's title would protect her. She thought the money was magic. She thought it just appeared because she deserved it. I felt a smile cut across my face, sharp and involuntary. It wasn't a nice smile, it was the baring of teeth. "Print it," I whispered. "Print all of it." I took the file home that night. I sat in my sterile white apartment, drinking water out of a crystal glass, and turned the pages one by one. I traced the numbers with a manicured fingernail. Every line item was a mockery of the work I had done. While I was eating instant oatmeal and sleeping under a desk to learn yield curves, she was billing the company for caviar facials. She had mocked my life choices. She had laughed at my little painting phase. She had posted her perfect life for the world to worship. But looking at these ledgers, I realized the truth. She didn't own her life. The bank did. The investors did. And as of tomorrow morning, I did. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. I spent the hours before dawn laying out my outfit. Presentation is a weapon. I chose a silk blouse the color of dried blood and a black pencil skirt that allowed for zero waste of movement. I pulled my hair back so tight it pulled at the corners of my eyes, sharpening my gaze. I applied my lipstick like war paint. I drove to the meeting location in my new car, a German sedan that hummed with quiet, lethal engineering. I didn't listen to the news. I drove in silence, letting the anticipation build in my chest like pressurized steam. I pulled up to the Lumina Aesthetics headquarters. It was a trendy building in Soho, all exposed brick and reclaimed wood. It looked like a playground for adults who refused to grow up. I handed my keys to the valet, who looked at me and scrambled to open my door. I stepped out, my heels clicking against the pavement with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Click, click, click. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist was a girl who looked like she'd been hired for her Instagram following. She barely looked up from her phone. "I have a meeting with the board," I said. My voice was low, but it carried. It cut through the ambient, chill hop music playing in the background. She looked up, annoyed. "Name, Keziah Vance, representing Blackwood and Sorensen." Her eyes went wide. The name meant nothing to her personally, but she had been warned. I saw her hand tremble as she reached for the phone. "Oh, right away." They're waiting in the main conference room." "I know," I said. I walked past her toward the elevators. I didn't need a visitor badge. I wasn't a visitor, I was the new landlord. The elevator ride up was smooth. I watched the numbers tick up. Floor 3, floor 4, floor 5. My heart was beating slow and hard, a war drum against my ribs. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the girl who used to cry in the rain. This woman was iron. This woman was fire. The doors slid open. The conference room was directly ahead. The glass walls were frosted, but I could see the silhouettes inside. I could see the slumped posture of defeated men, and I could see one silhouette pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly. Tiffany. I tightened my grip on the leather portfolio that held the documents destined to ruin her life. I didn't just walk toward the door, I marched. I reached out and pushed the heavy glass door open. The conversation inside died instantly. 6 heads snapped toward me. At the head of the table sat her husband, looking pale and nauseous. And standing to his right, wearing a white cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car, was Tiffany. She looked at me. Her eyes narrowed in confusion, then widened in shock, and finally settled into a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "Keziah." She breathed the word barely escaping her lips. I didn't say hello. I didn't smile. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, threw the heavy file down with a deafening thud, and sat down. "Sit down, Tiffany," I said, my voice filling the room. "We have a lot to discuss. Let's start with your salary." "I'm Keziah Vance, 30 years old, and I am the financial executioner sent to dismantle the companies that arrogance built and debt destroyed. My office on the 42nd floor is usually a sanctuary of silence, a hermetically sealed glass box where the air is filtered to a crisp, sterile chill. I like it cold. It keeps my pulse low and my mind sharp. I was staring at the gray expanse of the Manhattan skyline, watching the rain lash against the impact-resistant windows, when the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was a harsh, jagged sound that sliced through my concentration. "Vance," the senior partner's voice crackled through the speaker, devoid of pleasantries. "I'm sending a file to your secure server. It's a distressed asset, a mid-sized marketing firm that's hemorrhaging cash. We're moving to acquire the debt and strip the IP. I want you to lead the due diligence." "Name?" I asked, turning my swivel chair back toward my 3-monitor setup. "Thorn Marketing," he said. "Get me a preliminary valuation by close of business." The line went dead. My hand hovered over the mouse. Thorn Marketing. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. My heart hammered a sudden, violent rhythm against my ribs. Thump, 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 thump. I knew that name. I knew it intimately. It was a name that had been weaponized against me for 4 agonizing years of university. I closed my eyes for a second and I could hear her voice. "Tiffany." I could hear the tinkling, condescending laughter as she waved a platinum credit card at our table in the student union. Oh, Keziah, put your little wallet away. Daddy's company pays for everything. It's Thorn Marketing. We handle the biggest accounts in the city. You wouldn't understand the pressure of a legacy business. I opened my eyes. The rain was still falling outside, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I clicked the file. The screen flooded with spreadsheets, balance sheets, and profit and loss statements. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the rows of red numbers. The company wasn't just distressed, it was terminal. They were bleeding capital. The operational costs were astronomical, the revenue was flatlining, and the debt-to-equity ratio was a disaster. It was a sinking ship, taking on water faster than the pumps could work. I felt a cold, predatory focus sharpen my vision. I wasn't just an analyst anymore. I was a shark smelling blood in the water. I navigated to the payroll ledger. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a potent, intoxicating rush of adrenaline. I needed to see it. I needed to see the proof that the golden pedestal she stood on was made of fool's gold. I scrolled down the list of executives. CEO, CFO, COO, and there it was, Tiffany Blair Holloway, Senior Creative Director. I stared at the salary figure next to her name. I blinked, sure that I had misread the number of zeros. I hadn't. It was obscene. It was a salary that rivaled the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, attached to a title that, in a firm of this size, usually meant picking font colors and planning holiday parties. I dug deeper, opening her specific expense reports. My breath hitched. The screen filled with a litany of indulgence that made my stomach turn. March 12. Client development dinner Nabu $4,200. April 5. Inspiration retreat Bali $15,000. May 20. Office decor consultation $22,000. She was looting the company. While the lower-level employees were likely being denied raises or facing layoffs, Tiffany was treating the corporate treasury like her personal piggy bank. She was expensing her lifestyle, funding her delusions of grandeur with money that didn't exist. I remembered the way she used to look at my thrift store boots. I remembered the day she asked me in front of the entire seminar group if I was skipping the spring break trip because I didn't like to travel or because I couldn't afford the ticket. She had smiled when she said it, a sweet, poisonous smile that made everyone pity me. She had mocked my poverty. She had mocked my discipline. She had mocked the nights I spent studying while she was out networking with her father's connections. I looked at the red numbers on the screen, the debt that was about to be purchased by my firm, by me. A slow, icy sensation spread through my veins. It wasn't anger, it was something far more dangerous. It was absolute, unyielding control. As of this moment, Thorn Marketing belonged to Blackwood and Sorensen. And as the lead on this acquisition, I was the one who held the scalpel. I was the one who would decide what was essential and what was excess fat. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. I swiveled toward the window again, looking at the city below. Somewhere out there in a trendy loft or a glass-walled office, Tiffany was probably sipping a latte charged to the company card, completely unaware that the sky was falling. She didn't know that the girl she used to torment was now the woman holding the deed to her future. She thought her father's legacy protected her. She thought her last name was a shield. She didn't realize that in my world, names don't matter. Only numbers matter, and her numbers were atrocious. I reached for my phone. My movements were calm, precise. I dialed the extension for legal. "This is Vance," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor that had shaken me moments ago. "I've reviewed the Thorn Marketing file. Proceed with the acquisition immediately." I want the papers drawn up by morning and draft a restructuring plan. Standard aggressive takeover? The lawyer asked. No, I said, watching my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My silhouette looked sharp, severe. A faint, cold smile touched my lips, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Total liquidation of non-essential personnel. I want a line-by-line audit of executive compensation, specifically the creative department. Understood. I hung up the phone. The silence rushed back into the room, but it felt different now. It didn't feel empty. It felt electric. For years, I had let her define me by what I lacked. I lacked the money. I lacked the connections. I lacked the safety net. But looking at those files, I realized I had acquired something she never would. I had acquired the power to take it all away. I picked up my pen and tapped it rhythmically against the desk. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a countdown. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be an old classmate. I wouldn't be the charity case. Tomorrow, I would be her boss. I would be the nightmare she never saw coming. And when I walked into that boardroom and saw the recognition dawn in her eyes, I wasn't going to offer her mercy. I was going to offer her a severance package. Game over, Tiffany, I whispered to the empty room. I'm Keziah Vance, 30 years old, and I am currently walking into the lion's den disguised as a mouse to watch my tormentor self-destruct before I pull the trigger. I stood on the sidewalk outside the Thorn Marketing Building, the sleek glass structure reflecting the chaotic morning traffic of downtown. I wasn't wearing my usual tailored power suit, the one that screamed hostile takeover. Instead, I had dressed down. I wore a simple gray blouse, nondescript black slacks, and glasses I hadn't needed since my LASIK surgery 3 years ago. I pulled my hair back into a severe, unassuming bun. I looked like a nobody. I looked like an assistant. I looked like exactly the kind of person Tiffany Blair Holloway had spent her entire life ignoring. I clipped a temporary visitor badge to my lapel, external consultant, junior analyst, and pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby smelled like money. Not the crisp, metallic scent of earned wealth, but the cloying, perfumed stench of debt. There were fresh orchids on every surface, likely costing the firm thousands a month. The floors were Italian marble, polished to a mirror shine that probably cost more to maintain than the salaries of the 3 receptionists sitting behind the massive quartz desk. I approached the security gate, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I wasn't afraid of her anymore, but the body remembers trauma. My palms felt a phantom itch, a memory of the anxiety I used to feel walking into the cafeteria where she held court. I'm here for the preliminary audit, I told the guard, keeping my voice soft, submissive, just observing the workflow today. He waved me through without a second glance. I was invisible, perfect. I took the elevator to the top floor, the creative suite. When the doors slid open, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Downstairs was quiet luxury, up here was chaotic panic. I walked slowly through the open plan office. It was a sea of terrified 20-somethings hunched over Macs, typing furiously. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I could see it in the way they hunched their shoulders, the way they flinched when a phone rang. This wasn't a productive workspace, it was a sweatshop run by a tyrant. And then I heard it, the voice. It cut through the hum of the air conditioning like a serrated knife. High-pitched, nasal, and dripping with an entitlement so toxic it made my stomach turn. Are you actually incompetent, or are you just trying to sabotage my creative process? I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew that cadence. I knew that tone. It was the same tone she had used when she told me my clothes looked like they came from a donation bin. I turned toward the corner office. It was a glass box, entirely transparent, designed so everyone could see the queen bee, but no one could touch her. And there she was, Tiffany. She hadn't changed, and yet she looked like a caricature of herself. She was wearing that white cashmere sweater I'd see later in the boardroom, her blonde hair blown out to perfection. She was standing over a desk, looming over a girl who couldn't have been more than 22. The girl was shaking, visibly shaking. I moved closer, hugging a pillar, clutching my clipboard like a shield. I needed to hear this. I needed to witness the liability in action. I specifically said oat milk, Jessica. Tiffany screamed, her voice echoing through the glass. She picked up a takeaway coffee cup and slammed it down on the desk. Brown liquid sloshed over the rim, staining a stack of proofs. Almond milk creates inflammation. Do you want me to be puffy for the client meeting? Is that your goal, to make me look fat? The intern, Jessica, was staring at her shoes, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Tiffany, I just thought. You didn't think, Tiffany shrieked. You never think. Get this swill out of my sight and get me the right order. And don't even think about expensing the second one. That comes out of your paycheck. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. That coffee cost $7. That intern probably made $15 an hour if she was paid at all. This was it. This was the leadership that was driving the company into the ground. Tiffany turned away from the sobbing girl, flipping her hair over her shoulder with a huff of dramatic exhaustion. She began to pace her office, checking her reflection in the glass wall. That's when she saw me. I was standing just 10 feet away on the other side of the glass. Our eyes locked. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing infinity. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm, thump, 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 thump. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to look away, to hide. The old Keziah, the scholarship student with the scuffed boots, wanted to dissolve into the floor. But I forced my feet to stay planted. I forced my chin to stay up. I looked right into her eyes, my face a mask of blank professional curiosity. I watched her process my presence. I saw her eyes sweep over my plain blouse, my pulled back hair, my lack of designer jewelry. She didn't recognize me. She didn't see Keziah Vance, the girl she tormented in Econ 101. She didn't see the woman who now owned her debt. She saw a nobody. She saw a junior consultant, someone beneath her notice, someone irrelevant. She rolled her eyes at me, a look of pure dismissal, and turned her back. She turned her back on the executioner. A cold, dark satisfaction bloomed in my chest. It was better this way. If she had recognized me, she might have put up a fight. She might have tried to charm me. But this was raw, unfiltered negligence. I pulled a pen from my pocket and looked down at my clipboard. My hand was steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a clinical, icy rage. I wrote, hostile work environment. Potential lawsuits pending. I wrote, misuse of company funds, petty cash staff abuse. I wrote, ineffective leadership causing operational paralysis. I watched the intern run out of the office, clutching the rejected coffee, wiping her eyes. I stepped into her path. Hey, I said softly. The girl jumped, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. I'm sorry, I have to go, I have to get her. Don't worry about the coffee, I said, my voice low. Take a break, go to the bathroom, wash your face. But she'll fire me, the girl whispered. I looked over the girl's shoulder through the glass wall at Tiffany. She was on her phone now, laughing, probably booking another spa day on the company card. She won't be firing anyone, I said, a dangerous promise lacing my words. Trust me. I walked away before the girl could ask who I was. I marched back toward the elevators, my heels clicking a sharp, decisive rhythm on the marble. I had seen enough. I had seen the rot at the core of the apple. The spreadsheets told me the company was failing financially, but today I saw why. It wasn't the market. It wasn't the economy. It was her. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, sealing me off from the toxic fumes of Tiffany's kingdom, I caught my reflection in the polished metal of the doors. I didn't look like a junior consultant anymore. My eyes were hard. My posture was rigid. I checked my watch. The board meeting was in 1 hour. I was going to go to my car, retrieve my tailored blazer, pick up the heavy leather portfolio containing the acquisition papers, and walk right back into this building. But next time I wouldn't be standing outside the glass looking in. Next time I would be the one shattering it. I'm Keziah Vance, 30 years old, and 5 minutes ago I was an invisible nobody. But now I am about to become the most powerful person in this building. I sat in the driver's seat of my rented sedan, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The air conditioning blasted against my face, drying the sweat that had beaded on my forehead during my little undercover excursion. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The mouse was gone. I scrubbed off the pale, unassuming lip balm I'd worn to blend in and applied a coat of deep crimson lipstick. It wasn't makeup, it was war paint. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed my structured navy blazer. It was Italian wool, tailored to within an inch of its life, and it cost more than Tiffany's entire monthly wardrobe budget. I slipped it on, feeling the weight of the fabric settle on my shoulders like armor. I took off the non-prescription wire-rimmed glasses and tossed them into the glove box. I stepped out of the car and slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the parking garage. My heels clicked a violent, rhythmic warning on the concrete as I marched back toward the elevators. I didn't stop at the security desk this time. I flashed the heavy, black key card that had been courier delivered to my hotel that morning, the all-access executive pass. The guard started to stand up, saw the color of the card, and immediately sat back down, giving me a nervous nod. I didn't nod back. I was done being polite. I stepped into the executive elevator, the one with the brass railing and the velvet carpet. I pressed the button for the 40th floor. My stomach did a somersault as the car shot upward, but my face remained stone. I watched the numbers climb. 20, 30, 38, 39. Ding. The doors slid open to reveal the boardroom antechamber. It was silent up here. No chaotic typing, no screaming supervisors. Just the heavy, oppressive silence of money waiting to change hands. I pushed open the double mahogany doors. 12 men in dark suits turned to look at me. These were the current board members, the men who had watched Thorne Marketing bleed money for 2 years and done nothing to stop it. They looked tired, they looked defeated. And when they saw me, they looked relieved. I didn't introduce myself. They knew who I was. I was the bailout. I was the lifeline. I walked past them, the carpet absorbing the sound of my steps. I walked straight to the head of the table. The chair was massive, black leather, high-backed. It was the throne. It had been empty since the founder died 6 months ago, creating the power vacuum Tiffany had been trying so desperately to fill. I pulled the chair out. The leather creaked. I sat down. I placed my hands on the polished wood of the table, spreading my fingers. I claimed the space. The air in the room shifted. The oxygen seemed to get thinner. The men shifted in their seats, straightening their ties, closing their folders. We were waiting for one person. I checked the Rolex on my wrist. 9:15 a.m. She was 15 minutes late to the meeting that would decide the fate of her career. It was so typical. It was so Tiffany. She thought her time was the only currency that mattered. Then I heard it. Laughter, loud, brash, echoing from the hallway. No, I told him, if the venue isn't available, cancel the whole gala. Her voice drifted through the open doors, grating and high. I don't care about the deposit. It's my vision, okay? She breezed through the doorway, not even looking at the table. She was looking at her phone, thumb scrolling, a Starbucks cup, the correct order this time, presumably clutched in her other hand. She wore an air of invincible arrogance, the kind that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. "Sorry I'm late, gentlemen," she said dismissively, still looking at her screen. "Traffic was a nightmare, and the interns are incompetent per usual. Let's make this quick, I have a lunch at noon." She took 2 steps into the room before she sensed the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. The board members weren't looking at her. They were looking at me. Tiffany frowned, confusion flickering across her features. She finally lowered her phone. She looked up. She looked at the foot of the table, expecting to see me there, perhaps as a secretary or a junior aide. Her eyes traveled up the length of the long mahogany table. They passed the nervous board members. They landed on the head of the table. They landed on me. I saw the moment the synapses in her brain fired. I saw the confusion morph into shock and then into a cold, paralyzing horror. She squinted as if she couldn't believe what her eyes were telling her. She was looking at Keziah, the girl she had mocked for wearing thrift store coats. But she was also looking at the woman wearing a $10,000 blazer, sitting in the seat of the owner. The blood left her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her grip on reality fractured. The color drained from her face, her phone slipping from her hand and hitting the carpet with a dull thud. It lay there, the screen glowing up at us, forgot. I didn't smile. A smile would have been friendly. A smile would have implied we were playing a game. This wasn't a game. This was an autopsy. I leaned back, the leather groaning softly, and locked my fingers together on top of the acquisition papers. I held her gaze, refusing to blink, refusing to let her look away. I wanted her to see everything. I wanted her to see the scholarship student she'd tried to break. I wanted her to see the boss she now answered to. The silence stretched so tight I thought it might snap and take one of our heads off. "Hello, Tiffany Blair Holloway," I said, my voice low, controlled, and as sharp as a razor blade. She flinched, physically flinched, as if I had slapped her. "Hey, Keziah," she stammered, her voice a breathless whisper. What are you doing there? You can't." "Security." She spun around looking for help, but the doors were closed. "This is a restricted meeting, you can't just walk in here." "Sit down, Tiffany," I commanded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Excuse me." Her voice cracked, shrill and panicked. "Who do you think you are?" I placed my hand on the thick file in front of me. I flipped open the cover. The first page was the transfer of ownership agreement, signed, notarized, and effective as of 8:00 a.m. this morning. "I think," I said, my eyes drilling into hers, "that I am the majority shareholder of Thorn Marketing. I think I am the new owner of this building, this table, and that chair you're standing next to." I paused, letting the words sink into her skin like acid. "And I think," I continued, "that you are currently in violation of the Employee Code of Conduct for lateness and insubordination." Tiffany grabbed the back of the nearest chair to steady herself. Her knees were actually buckling. "This is a joke," she whispered, looking at the other board members. "Tell me this is a joke." The chairman of the board, a man Tiffany had ignored for years, cleared his throat. "Ms. Vance acquired the controlling stake this morning, Tiffany. She is the new CEO." The reality hit her like a freight train. I watched her ego shatter in real time. "Now," I said, gesturing to the empty chair at the far end of the table, the seat furthest from power, the seat for the lowest-ranking person in the room. "Pick up your phone, sit down, we have to discuss your performance review." I smiled then. It was a cold, terrifying thing. "And Tiffany, you might want to take notes." I watched Tiffany sink into the chair at the far end of the table, her movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. She looked small down there. Just minutes ago, she had filled the hallway with her booming, entitled laughter, but now the distance between us felt like miles of scorched earth. I rested my fingertips on the cool, matte finish of the black folder in front of me. This wasn't just a performance review, it was an indictment. I flipped the cover open. The sound of the stiff paper turning was the only noise in the room. I let the silence hang for a moment, heavy and suffocating, forcing her to sit in it. I saw her throat bob as she swallowed. She reached for her coffee cup, but her hand was trembling so badly she pulled it back, afraid to spill it and show her fear. Let's begin with the fiscal overview of the last 3 quarters, I said, my voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room without needing to shout. I ran my finger down the first column of data. In Q1, under your direct supervision, the branding department went over budget by $400,000. I read, lifting my eyes to lock onto hers. You allocated $50,000 strictly for client entertainment at venues owned by your personal friends. The return on investment for those events was zero. Tiffany opened her mouth, her face flushing a blotchy, ugly red. That was networking. You can't put a price tag on. I can, I cut in, my voice icy. And I did, it's right here in red ink. I flipped the page again. The sound was like a whip crack in the quiet room. In Q2, you spearheaded the Modern Edge campaign, I continued, leaning forward slightly. You fired the senior graphic design team because you said their vision was stale and hired an external boutique agency. That agency billed us triple the standard rate. I paused, watching a bead of sweat detach itself from her hairline and track a shiny path down her temple. It got caught in her heavy foundation, a fissure in her perfect mask. The campaign failed to launch, I stated flatly. The focus groups hated it. You scrapped the entire project 2 weeks before the deadline. Total loss $1.2 million. I saw the board members nodding in my periphery. They had been too afraid of her father's legacy to say this to her face, but they were drinking it in now. I was their voice. I was their retribution. And finally, Q3, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. This is my favorite. I looked down at the numbers, letting a dry, humorless chuckle escape my lips. You lost 3 major legacy clients, clients who had been with this firm since before you were born. And the exit interviews all cited the same reason: unprofessional leadership and lack of strategic direction. I closed the folder. It landed with a final, damning thud. Tiffany, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms over my chest. In less than 2 years, you have burned through more capital than I have earned in my entire life. Her eyes widened, shimmering with wet, angry tears. You used to make fun of me for packing a lunch, I reminded her, the memory fueling the fire in my chest. You mocked me for buying art supplies on sale. You called me a starving artist like it was a slur. You laughed at my thrift store coat. I stood up slowly. I felt 10 feet tall. My entire starving artist career cost less than your catering budget for last month, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I built a life on scraps while you set fire to a fortune you didn't earn. Tiffany gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. You don't understand the pressure. The market was volatile. I was trying to pivot the company image. The market didn't buy those designer handbags on the company card, Tiffany, I shot back. I can explain that, she shrilled, half rising from her chair. That was for a photo shoot prop. I was going to return it. You're twisting everything because you're jealous. You've always been jealous. I didn't yell. I didn't bang the table. I just held up one hand, palm facing her. The gesture was simple, absolute. "Stop," I said. And she did. Her mouth snapped shut with an audible click. She slumped back into her chair as if her strings had been cut. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but the 12 men in suits were studying their hands or looking at the wall. She was alone. For the first time in her life, Daddy's money couldn't buy her an exit. I lowered my hand slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on her terrified face. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressing down on us like deep ocean water. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. The power dynamic had shifted so violently I could almost hear the air crackling around us. "I'm Keziah Vance, 29, and I just bought the company that employs the woman who made my high school years a living hell." I dismissed the board members with a single, sharp nod. They scrambled to collect their tablets and folios, eager to escape the radioactive tension in the room. They filed out past Tiffany, avoiding her gaze like she was contagious. I didn't look at her, not yet. I gathered my files, the crisp leather of my portfolio feeling cool against my sweating palms. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and disbelief, but my hands were steady. I stood up. "My office," I said to the empty air, knowing she would follow. 5 minutes. I walked out of the conference room without waiting for a response. The hallway felt different. Yesterday, I had walked this carpet as a vendor, hoping for a contract. Today, I walked it as the owner. The air conditioning seemed crisper. The hushed whispers of the employees in the cubicles stopped abruptly as I passed. They knew. News travels at the speed of light in a place like this. I reached the double glass doors at the end of the corridor. The plaque on the wall still said CEO, Richard Thorne. I made a mental note to have that ripped down within the hour. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the sanctuary. It was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, turning the cars below into insignificant specks. The desk was a slab of mahogany big enough to land a plane on. I walked behind it and sat down. The chair was high-backed, ergonomic, and cost more than my first car. I spun it slightly, facing the door, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Click, click, click. The sound was uneven, frantic. It wasn't the confident, rhythmic strut Tiffany usually patrolled the hallways with. It was a stumble. She burst through the door without knocking. Her face was a ruin. Her mascara, usually applied with surgical precision, had begun to smudge at the corners of her eyes. Her skin was blotchy, patches of red blooming across her neck and chest. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. "Keziah," she breathed, her voice wobbling. "Kez, wow, this is insane, right?" I didn't speak. I just watched her. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to fill it. She pushed off the door and took a few tentative steps toward the desk. She tried to smile, but her lips twitched violently. It was a grotesque imitation of friendliness. "I mean, look at you," she laughed, the sound high and brittle. "Sitting there, I told them. I literally told the girls in HR last week. Keziah Vance is going places. I always knew it, even back at St. Jude S. My stomach turned over. The audacity was physically nauseating. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. "St. Jude's," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes." She seized on the acknowledgement, rushing forward until her thighs bumped against the front of the desk. She placed her hands on the wood, leaning in intimately. "God, we had some times, didn't we? Remember the pep rallies? Remember senior prom? We go way back, Keziah. We have history. That counts for something in this industry. Loyalty is everything." I stared at her manicured fingernails digging into my desk. "I remember prom," I said softly. I remember you telling the committee that if they let trash like me in, the event would be ruined. I remember you paying the DJ $50 to cut the music when I walked onto the dance floor. Tiffany's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. Oh, come on, we were kids. That was just high school drama. Everyone was mean in high school. It made us tougher, right? It made you who you are. She reached out, trying to touch my hand, which rested on the file. I pulled back instantly, as if she were a burning coal. Don't, I said. She recoiled, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch. When she looked back at me, the mask of friendship had dissolved. Panic was setting in, real, unfiltered panic. Keziah, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. You can't do this. You can't cut me. The restructuring is necessary, I said, using the corporate jargon she loved so much against her. The marketing department is bloated. We need to trim the fat. I'm not fat, she shrieked, hysteria creeping in. I am the face of this department. My father built this client list. Your father is retired, I reminded her, and the clients are leaving. She slumped, her knees hitting the modesty panel of the desk with a thud. I have a mortgage, Keziah. I have the lease on the Mercedes. I have credit card bills you wouldn't believe. I can't lose this salary. I literally cannot survive without this paycheck. She was begging. The queen bee, the girl who used to throw half-eaten sandwiches at my feet because she wasn't hungry anymore, was begging me for her livelihood. I'll do anything, she stammered, tears finally spilling over and tracking black streaks down her cheeks. I'll take a pay cut. I'll be your assistant. I'll fetch your coffee. Just don't fire me, please. We're old friends. I looked at her, really looked at her. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, hard resolution. I reached for my purse, which I had set on the floor beside my chair. Tiffany watched me, her breath hitching, hope flickering in her wet eyes. She probably thought I was reaching for a tissue or a contract. I opened my wallet. My fingers brushed past the platinum credit cards and found the small, separate pocket where I kept emergency cash. I pulled out a single bill. It was crisp. It was green. I placed the $20 bill on the mahogany desk. I placed 2 fingers on it and slid it slowly across the smooth wood. It stopped right in front of her shaking hands. Tiffany stared at the money, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is this?" she whispered. "I remember the day I got into art school," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "I was celebrating in the cafeteria. I was so happy. I was going to follow my dream." Tiffany looked up at me, her mouth slightly open. She remembered. I could see it in her eyes. "You walked by with your entourage," I continued. "You laughed. You said art was a hobby for rich wives, not a career for charity cases. And then you threw a $20 bill in my soup." The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the hard drive in the computer tower. "You told me to buy myself a clue," I said. Tiffany's face went gray. She looked at the money, then back at me, horror dawning on her. "I kept that $20, I lied. It wasn't the same bill, but the symbolism was heavier than gold. I framed it in my mind. Every time I wanted to quit, every time I was tired, every time I was hungry, I thought of that $20. I leaned back in the leather chair, crossing my arms. "Take it," I commanded. "Keziah, take it," I repeated, my voice hardening. "It's your severance package. It's all you're getting." She stared at the bill. Her hands were trembling so violently that her bracelets rattled together. "You're firing me?" she choked out. "No," I corrected her. "I'm buying you a clue. You're not cut out for this industry, Tiffany. You never were." I pointed to the door. "Get out of my building." "I'm Keziah Vance, 29, and I just bought the company that employs the woman who made my high school years a living hell." Tiffany didn't move. My command to get out hung in the air, but her feet seemed nailed to the expensive Persian rug I now owned. She stared at the $20 bill on the desk, her chest heaving in quick, shallow gasps that sounded like a drowning swimmer. I watched a single bead of sweat track through the layer of foundation on her forehead, cutting a path through the artificial perfection she had maintained for a decade. "I can't," she whispered, the words barely escaping her throat. "Keziah, please, you don't understand. If I walk out that door, I lose the condo, I lose everything. My dad cut me off 3 years ago, I have nothing but this job." I leaned back in the massive leather chair, the leather creaking softly under my weight. My pulse was thrumming in my ears, a steady, powerful drumbeat. This was the moment I had replayed in my head 1,000 times while eating instant noodles in a cold studio apartment, wondering if my art would ever pay the bills. "You have the $20, I said cold, my voice devoid of sympathy. "That should cover lunch." She made a sound that was half sob, half choke. Her knees finally gave out and she sank into the guest chair, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook violently. It was a total collapse. The impenetrable armor of the mean girl had disintegrated, leaving behind a terrified woman drowning in debt and bad choices. I watched her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, not joy exactly, but a dark, heavy satisfaction. It was the feeling of scales finally balancing after years of being weighed down. "There is," I said slowly, "one other option." Tiffany's head snapped up. Her mascara was running in black rivers down her cheeks. "What? Anything, I'll do anything." I opened the top drawer of the mahogany desk. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth paper of the document I had prepared hours ago. I pulled it out and slid it across the desk, right over the $20 bill. "Read it." She grabbed the paper with desperate hands, her eyes scanning the text frantically. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief and finally to pure humiliation. "Junior graphic associate," she read aloud, her voice trembling. "Reporting to, directly to you." "Keep reading," I instructed. "Look at the compensation package." Her eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. She froze, her mouth opened but no sound came out. She looked up at me, her face pale. $24,000, she squeaked. "Keziah, that's impossible. My base salary is 6 figures. This is a joke." "Is it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. I seem to remember a conversation in the cafeteria during our senior year. You were loudly discussing financial aid students. You said that 24,000 a year was pocket change, and that any adult earning that amount was a waste of space who should be embarrassed to show their face in public. I saw the memory land. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I remember every word, Tiffany," I continued, my voice dropping an octave. "You said it was a joke for a grown woman to earn that, so I thought it was a fitting number for your new reality." "I can't live on this," she cried, tears welling up again. "My car payment alone is—" "Sell the car," I cut her off. "Take the bus, I did it for 5 years." I stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge so I was towering over her seated form. "Here is the reality," I said, counting the points off on my fingers. "Option A, you walk out that door, you get zero severance. I will personally ensure that every agency in the city knows exactly why you were let go. You will be radioactive." She shuddered. "Option B," I continued. "You sign that contract. You take the demotion, you work for me, you fetch my coffee, you clean up my file, you do the grunt work that you used to mock me for doing, you keep your health insurance, and you get to say you still work here." I crossed my arms. "Your pride or your paycheck, choose." The room was deathly quiet. I could hear the hum of the city outside the thick glass windows, a world that kept moving while Tiffany's life ground to a halt. She looked at the contract. She looked at the door. I saw the war raging behind her eyes. She wanted to throw the paper in my face. She wanted to scream. But the fear of poverty, the fear of losing her social standing, was stronger than her dignity. Her hand shook uncontrollably as she reached into her purse and pulled out a pen. She hesitated for one last second, the tip of the pen hovering over the signature line. She looked up at me, pleading silently for mercy. I gave her nothing but a blank stare. She signed. It wasn't her usual bold, looping autograph. It was small, cramped, and defeated. She pushed the paper toward me, her eyes fixed on her lap. She looked broken. The girl who had terrorized the hallways of St. Jude S was gone, replaced by my employee. I picked up the document. I checked the signature. Then I took my own pen, a heavy gold fountain pen, and signed my name on the line next to hers. The ink flowed dark and permanent. Keziah Vance, CEO. Welcome to the team, I said, straightening up. Be here at 8:00 a.m. sharp. If you're late, I dock your pay. Tiffany stood up on shaky legs. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. She turned and walked toward the door, her posture slumped, her expensive heels dragging on the carpet. Oh, and Tiffany, I called out just as she reached the handle. She froze, not turning around. Don't forget the $20, I said. You're going to need it. She didn't take the money. She pushed the door open and fled into the hallway. I listened to the click of the latch. I was alone. I looked down at the signed contract in my hands. A decade-old weight, a stone I had carried in my gut since I was 16, suddenly evaporated. My shoulders dropped. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, conditioned air of my office. It tasted sweet. It tasted like victory.